Welcome to the Success in Africa podcast with Dr. Modupe, your weekly dose of leadership vitamins to make you successful in Africa.
Hello, and welcome to another episode of the Success in Africa podcast, brought to you by BCA Online, the one-stop shop for mastering leadership. My name is Dr. Modupe Taylor Pearce, and I am a scholar and practitioner of leadership and organizational development. Simply put, I study what makes people successful. I've been doing this for 3 decades now with a particular focus on people who are successful right here in Africa. And in this podcast, I share stories, lessons, insights about those people and sometimes directly from them. Today's episode is one such. You're going to listen to a panel discussion that is moderated by a British legend of leadership. His name is Professor David Clutterbuck. But it's not just him you're learning from. You're going to learn from 3 African global coaching legends. Only 3 people have been nominated as global coaching legends. This is a select club. And all 3 of them are engaged in this panel discussion. We've been, over the last 3 weeks, airing portions of this panel discussion. This is the 4th and final portion, and I hope that you will enjoy it.
And so, once again, with the political, you want people to be politically aware, but you don't want to be politically naive, and you don't want to be politically manipulative, but you want to be them to be able to be to understand the nub of politics. All of the qualities that we're looking at, the behaviours we're looking at, these are polarities. We're making choices on a spectrum from one unacceptable extreme to another unacceptable extreme. So, what are the zones of acceptability here? And leadership, effective leadership, operates within those zones. Now, if you get into a situation like we have in the United States, those zones of acceptability have just been widened to ridiculous levels, and they've got the polarities wrong. But what coaching can do, and coaching style conversations by leaders can do, is to actually allow us to take a really good rational look at a polarity and say, where is the greatest benefit, or where are the points on this where the greatest benefit comes? And so we are sense making by helping people see the polarities and make more informed, humane decisions about where on each polarity their own behavior should be and the behavior of the organization should be.
I think he touched on something interesting there. I'm the founder of Zanga African Metrics, which is Africa's first psychometric assessments for the workplace that see the context. And the reason we did this and have driven this cultural and context-centered design around leadership development in emerging markets is because it is understood that there are 2 people who show up to work. There's the version that is the professional, or the definition of what the professional person is supposed to be doing. And then there's the actual person. And the actual person is influenced by their own culture. And so in our assessment tool, we measure both. And what we brought in and understood is that you have to bring in the competencies, rightly so, of what's supposedly to be effective. But you also have to see their beliefs and value systems, the cultural dimensions that prop them up, and through which they filter their decisions. Because this is where some of the polarities are actually tested. And so that in our assessments, we look at your competencies, but also your influences coming from the culture. And that is where people are making decisions. And you can't see this, and it's not named, it's not said, but it's very present in the room. And so we adapted the approach to coaching and have very much Dumi and Modupe have been part of this process, because we're realizing that when you're in the coaching space, who are you contracting with? You're contracting with the visible individual and the system that you're supporting them to be effective in. But you're also contracting with an invisible system that has not, you encounter in the conversation in terms of how the goals stick and the experiences that the individual goes through, because there's a framing in there, there's a lens in there. And so what we think about, I like the expression of the intelligent management of polarities. There are three things that are emerging in our insights. We're producing our first insights report on the first 1,000 people who have done the assessment. A few things are coming out in terms of how do leaders dilute themselves in ways to fit. And so there's the dilution around what is considered professional, as am I doing the right things a leader should be doing, and that makes it superficial, and you're trying to get to that being sustainable in the long run, and it's nothing more than there's nothing worse than urgency or crisis to really bring out how sustainable those original perceptions are about what makes me professional. And then, am I legible? The second part. And this is in the African context, to the person who's going to promote me. So, am I actually visible to them and doing the things in a way that favor will follow me? But the third one was also interesting, because for me, this third part was these three are pressure points. The pressure to survive and to be able to protect yourself. And so when you look at what happens in organizations, especially when we're looking through the lens of the African context, that political result you noted in your data about the political intelligence and behavior, our social and cultural systems require you to understand politics. Because the minute you walk into a room, you have to understand the rank and file. Who speaks first? Who speaks last? You read the system that is not invisible, because that helps you stay safe. And so that political savviness, and maybe in those results, is an innate ability that is an advantage when you come into organizations. Now the challenge then goes to where it is used to manipulate. But that capability is a very real one, because wherever you go, you have to know your place, and we are constantly navigating the political consequences of your actions and your behavior. And as such, those polarities that you are navigating come from a skill set that is not measured, but actually is very applicable when you're at work. So I just wanted to mention that, because those human the polarities are expectations we have of people. And when we, in the coaching space, we recognize from an African perspective that a number of the skills you have that help you coexist in your personal relationships and your social and cultural relationships are an advantage in this room and can help you manage these polarities. Thank you.
Wow.
We are, and I recognize that there is a global discussion and there's an African discussion. And I freely confess that I spend a lot of my energies on the African discussion. But it's important, it's important to note what you've said, Nankhonde. We are a very relational culture. And in Africa, cash may be king, but relationships are gold. And there are things that one will get that you cannot just get with money. You have to be properly, you have to have the right relationships. And for better, for worse, we prioritize culturally relationships over rules. And So when you talk about this, now for us as coaches, and as we look at achieving developmental outcomes in a continent that we lament has not punched, shall we say, its weight when it comes to resources, we have to be able to have the courage to examine some of these things and say, are they serving us? Or to what extent might they not be serving us or serving us or getting us closer or farther away? And as coaches and leadership practitioners and leadership consultants, let's call it that, and advisors, we also need to be in the forefront of this exploration, which, by the way, is a scary one, because being willing to say, "Gee, are those values or those habits that my grandfather, grandmother has drummed into me, are those truly values that we should maintain? Are they helping us or are they hurting us?" But it's really incumbent on us as the thought leaders, as global legends of coaching, to be willing to be at the forefront of those questions, and to have the courage when we see that they are either not helping or helping, to speak it out and say, this might sound good, but it's actually contributing to our underdevelopment or to some outcome that we may not desire. And I say this to us as Africans because it is difficult. If it's difficult for us to call it out, it will certainly be very difficult for somebody who's not African to call it out, even if they see it as clear as day. So I challenge us as global legends to really be at the forefront of exploration and to have the courage to call out certain things that may not be popular, and as well as obviously celebrate the things that are good and work, so that the leaders throughout organizations in Africa can have a beacon of thought leaders that they can say, you know what, actually, these folks seem to understand where the continent is going. And I'll say one more thing before I invite all of us to give a couple of perhaps closing comments as time is moving. It's technology advances, the world changes. And whether we want to or not, we have to also adapt. I was blown away by Mark Carney's speech, which I thought was incredibly courageous at Davos, where he admitted that certain things that could be considered part of Canadian culture, they had to let go of in order to chart a new way forward. And for us in Africa, I see such an opportunity, because the reality is the old bargain is changing for our leaders. Whether it was the donor money and this and coming in and getting funds here and how we treated, certain, public funds and private funds, that bargain is changing. Our partners are changing in what they're requiring. And we as coaches, we as leadership advisors need to be at the forefront of saying, in this world of change, what behaviors are going to continue to serve our people and our leaders, and what behaviors are going to ensure that we continue to be on the menu, supposed to be seated at the table. And that's a challenge I share with myself and with all of you as we go forward as leadership advisors.
Great, thank you. Do you want to go first, Nankhonde?
Very interesting. And I think the what I'm hearing here is that leadership can be captured in a book, but it's lived in practice, and it evolves in practice. And our contributions as thought leaders provides a mirror to the patterns that are coming out of the practice that we're observing, how actually leadership is being applied in different parts of the world, and whether it's yielding the results we want to see. And so it's also saying that that global notion of leadership is redundant. That local experience now is where impact, I think, is driving how to be able to see the pattern, but still respond to the pieces within it. And as coaches, we're continuously trying to navigate and support how you walk with somebody who's trying to hold both. See the pattern, the bigger picture, but identify the individual pieces at the same time. And it is difficult. But I think also with the evolution of the human being itself, and I'm recently looking more and more into how the connection with just the development and the psychology of people, how people interpret, operate their own experiences based on their history, which is where we started from, and what has influenced their journey to the point where they're in the room with the coach working with them, is key. And so what I'm trying to get to is, and maybe better expressed for me in terms of what this conversation offers, is the greatest gift we can give the future is to leave enough information from the patterns we have noticed. And that is going to then help be contextualized in whatever form it needs to evolve into. There's a Zambian proverb that says, "Ninsokolwe, yabana ninsokolwe, tashilia watemini." And I refer to this because it is not just a personal wisdom I received from my father, but it's an indication of how also our culture stores information in ways that it can be pulled or called upon like a reservoir when it's needed. And it's this berry that is in the bush over time that grows, but the berries are so high, and so to reach them, you have to kind of let them fall or hack the tree, which maybe in this climate change area is not the best thing to do. But it's the only way to access the berry. It drops. But you cannot eat them until they've dried, which means that the person passing is constantly dropping berries for a person they will never meet. And the conversation is how what we're discussing here about leadership is confronting the question of what we have to nourish leaders with today. Is it sufficient? What we're feeding leaders today, is it sufficient to nourish them? And as such, how are we then going to not only support reading the map, reading the patterns, but also upskilling and changing the training for those who support the leaders, those who help them find the berries and eat them in season and in time in a way that makes sense and has meaning for the result. And so I want to close just my final words around that wisdom, because I think part of leadership is also understanding that I don't have all the information, but with the information I have right now, this is serving and this is not serving. And who are the people who hold up the mirror to allow us to have that conversation? It's why we're sitting here, because we're still holding up the mirror that others will use as data.
Thank you. Dumi.
Thank you, Nankhonde. Beautiful closing. I wanted very short, briefly, for me, one of the greatest things we have, the opportunity we have right now in front of us, is igniting conscious human awareness about what is required for us to progress together, not separately, together. It's seeing the connections. across these superficial differences that have been imposed, whether they're borders, whether they're professional boundaries, and that within organizations, outside organizations, that those teams of teams, I like that, David, your book on beyond teaming. It's really beyond those narrow confines we put ourselves into to try and make sense of really complexities that Nankhonde was talking to in the world we're in today. For me, it's the one of the things we can work on towards igniting genuine, authentic human connection across these boundaries is unlocking human agency at scale. To unlock human agency at scale, we need to appreciate that we come different, and we come bearing gifts of our individual uniqueness and brilliance and genius. And every space has the potential to help us unleash and express that. So it's about enabling and empowering and allowing sometimes each other to be the best versions of ourselves, regardless whatever space we're sharing in that moment, consciously.
Thank you, Dumi. And I'd just like to sum it up by saying that whether we're a coach or whether we're a leader, every day that passes, we should be becoming wiser ourselves and helping others around us become wiser. If we haven't done that, we've just wasted a day.
Indeed. Thank you very much. I love it. And let me just say a huge thanks to all of you, especially David, but also Nankhonde from New York and Zambia, and Dumi from South Africa for joining us here and really just sharing your wisdom. I feel like we could have gone for hours and hours, but there's so much that we can glean from this. And indeed, like Nankhonde said, today we have dropped lots and lots of berries. And there will be future coaches, leaders, trainers, advisors, consultants who will, in due time, at the right time, pick up the dried berries and turn them into the fruits and the proteins that will nourish a generation. Thank you so much for listening and watching this episode, where we discussed the topic of the impact of leaders and the fact that leaders can move mountains. It's been such a pleasure being a part of this panel discussion. I'm so honored. I'm so grateful to my fellow coaching legends and to Professor David Clutterbuck. And I hope that you, the reader and the listener and the watcher, has gleaned something from these interviews. And if you have, please like, subscribe, and share. Remember, success is a team game, not an individual sport. Share this video with your friends, your colleagues, your fellow Africans. Let's build Africa together. Let's make it into the continent that it was designed to be, and it has the potential to become a high-income continent by the year 2040. I'll see you next week.
Tomorrow belongs to those people who prepare for it today. See you next week.